Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. It's been a year or so since my last chair upcycle video, so I've put together a more recent and up-to-date one for you all today. Today I'm going to be showing you how I took an old tired looking antique chair and gave it a new lease of life with a new paint job and some new upholstery, so if you're interested in following along then keep on watching. I know this chair does look like it's in a bit of a state, but the frame is pretty solid and the springs and webbing are all in good order too, which is why I bought it. So I'm going to get straight into it and start stripping it down to the frame. For the stripping down process, I'm going to be using some needle nose pliers, a tack lifter and some scissors. So this process is pretty messy, so I'd advise to strip down an old chair outside, and it's also advised to wear a face mask at all times. I should be wearing one, so don't follow my bad habits here. So to start, I'm tearing off all the original trim. The trim is what hides our tacks underneath. Then, after I've removed the trim, I'm going to be tearing off all the original fabric. The cotton padding that's inside this chair is actually in pretty good condition. Whoever's done this upholstery job before hasn't done a bad job, so to save costs, we're going to be keeping this safe to one side and reusing it later. So now that I've removed all of the fabric and padding from the back of the chair, it's time to take the tack lifter, prise it underneath each tack and lift them out one by one. These things can be pretty sharp, so dispose of them straight away as you remove them from the frame. Now that I've removed all of the tacks from the back of the chair, it's now time to start on the seat part. So I'm repeating the same process here, tearing off all the trim, all of the fabric, setting the padding aside and removing all of the visible tacks. Now that all of the tacks have been pulled from the frame, it's time to grab my sander and some medium grit sandpaper and sand the whole frame down. This will help provide a key to the wood so that our paint sticks. Now that the frame of the chair is thoroughly sanded, I'm going to grab my trusty elbow grease, spray the chair down and wipe clean. It's really important to remove all the grease and grime from the piece that you wish to paint, because if you don't, the paint will not stick well to your piece. Now that the cleaning process is done, it's time to prime my piece. So, in a well-ventilated area, and somewhere where the primer won't land on anything with overspray, I'm now flipping my piece upside down and begin spraying on my primer. There's so many paint and products out there that claim you don't need to prep and prime before painting, but in this case I am going to be using primer because I want the reassurance that I'm going to have a tough and durable paint job. Now that I've applied several thin coats of primer and allowed time to dry, it's now time to paint my piece. I'm going to be using Dixie Belle paint in the colour Cotton. Now I don't want any brush strokes in this finish, so I'm going to be using a piece of old foam and using a pouncing method, which will help me achieve a flatter finish with no brush strokes. Now I do want to add, this method of painting takes far longer than if you're using a brush, but this is my personal preference as I didn't want any brush strokes in my finish. Out of all the white paints out there on the market, Dixie Belle's Cotton has a really good coverage, so I'll probably get away with 2 or at the most 3 coats here. So now that the first coat has had time to dry, I'm taking some 240 grit sandpaper and lightly sanding all over. This will make sure the first coat is completely smooth before applying my next coat. So I've managed to get away with just the 2 coats, which is really good for a white paint. So now it's time to seal. I haven't got any Gator Hide by Dixie Belle on hand, so I'm going to use French Chic finishing coat to brush on and seal my piece. In total, I gave the chair 2 full coats of finishing coat. Then I put it out in the sun to dry for about an hour or so before I went any further. It's now time for upholstery. To start, I'm measuring the back of the chair and cutting a piece of fabric large enough with some excess around the edge. I'm keeping the right side of the fabric facing away from me so that it can be seen from the back of the chair. I start by anchoring the piece with 4 staples, and then I work around the frame, making sure I keep the fabric really taut, but make sure I keep the grain straight. Now that this piece is secured in place, we can see that the right side of the fabric is visible from the back of the chair. To keep things neat, I'm now going to trim away any excess fabric before moving on to the next step, which is adding the padding. I'm now taking the cotton padding from earlier, and because I want more of a plump filling in the back, I'm sandwiching it between 2 layers of thick poly fibre. I then trim this to size, and now I'll staple it into the back of the chair. The same way I fix the backing fabric in, I'm anchoring the padding in with a few staples and then working my way around the edge, tucking and folding as I go, making sure I keep my staples neat and close to the edge so none poke through the back of the frame. I then measure for more fabric, allowing myself some excess to tug and pull the fabric into place. Again, anchoring a few staples to keep things straight and then working around the frame, making sure I keep things really taut and keep the grain of the fabric running straight. Here I'm taking some small sharp embroidery scissors and trimming away the excess fabric, trying to keep as close as possible to the staple line without scratching the paint finish. It's now time to work on the seat. I take my padding which I set aside from earlier and place it on the chair. I want quite a plump seat on this chair, so I'm adding 2 layers of 8-ounce polyfibre. I make a snip in each side so that my fibre fits around the 2 back posts. I then begin pulling and tucking as I staple all the way around the edge. So, as the same as before, I'm measuring for my seat fabric, making sure that I've got plenty of excess to pull on so I can keep the fabric nice and taut. I then carefully make a snip on each side to the middle of the back post and tuck and pull my fabric towards the back. If you are nervous at this stage, just make several small snips and keep on checking in between to make sure that you're doing it right. Once I've pulled the fabric through to the back of the chair, it's now time to secure the fabric in place with a few staples on the back and then the front, and then I work my way around the chair, pulling the fabric taut as I go, but just making sure that the grain runs straight at all times. So there are a few different ways of doing corners on chairs, but I choose to keep things simple and just go with a small pleat. And as the same as before, I'm taking my small embroidery scissors and trimming away all of the excess fabric, making sure I keep really close to the staple line, but without scratching the paint finish. And for the very last step, it's time to add the trim. I'm using double welt trim, or double piping as some people call it, and I'm using a glue gun with high temp glue in it to attach it. I make this on the sewing machine from the same fabric, so if anyone's interested on learning how to make their own trim, let me know in the comments below and maybe I can make a video on that soon. When it comes to gluing on trim, it's important to apply enough glue to properly secure it, but not too much so that it squeezes out and looks messy. And here we have the finished chair. I know this was a bit of a long video guys, so thanks for following along and sticking it out until the end. I hope you've managed to pick up a handful of tips to use yourself when you go to upcycle a chair of your own. Let me know your thoughts on my finished chair in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you all again on my next video.